So I could just tell the energy level in the room shifted when you got the chance to talk versus when people up front were talking. So I want to start this out with a little bit of participation right off the bat. So raise your hand if you're if you're involved with business. All right, put them down real quick. Let's do this fast. If you're involved in nonprofits, raise your hand. If you're a philanthropist, raise your hand. Okay, so I want you to think about, raise your hand if you give over $364 to some organization over the year. Okay. So the question I have for you is, for all the people that had put your hand up for the last question, the question I have for you is, why didn't you put your hand up as a philanthropist? This question about who's a philanthropist is at the heart of what I want to talk about today. So I'll give you a quick little context about Headwaters Foundation for Justice, the work we do in Minneapolis, and then introduce you into this idea that we've been talking about as democratizing philanthropy. This may or may, oh yeah, there we go. So first of all, a little bit about Headwaters. So we're a community foundation. It's really great to follow George with the Kresge Foundation because we're very different than that. A community foundation is a couple things. One, we raise the money we give out annually. Two, we are actually basically like a nonprofit, and our mission actually has us giving out money. So that's kind of give you a little bit of context to Headwaters. We're also a social justice foundation. So what I mean by that is we support organizations that are working on the root causes of social injustices in society. And specifically, we fund community organizing as the strategy for change. So I'll just give you a little quick context. We're a statewide funder. Our mission really is to amplify the power of community around advancing equity and justice. And what's important in that is that for 35 years, we've been wrestling with what that really means. Now, for most of our 33 years, it's meant that we do this thing called community-led grant making. So the grant decisions, because let's back up a minute and say, philanthropy is about money and power. I'll just be clear about that. It's about money and power. So for us, justice and equity requires us to put the people at the center of money and power. So for 33 years, we had a model where we brought community members together, gave them the power to make the grant decisions. And it was really powerful because people of color would come in. They'd come in a cohort of about 15, 20 people. We'd identify community leaders. And it was kind of the peer review process. They would read the grants, score the grants, go on the site visits, and then make the investments for our foundation. My job as the leader of the foundation was to raise the money so that they could give it out. We all felt good, pat ourselves on the back, justice, equity, that's okay. About 2.5 years ago, I became the executive director, and I asked the question at the board, well, we'll get there in a minute. I asked the question at the staff and said, who's a philanthropist? And we all talked about giving out grants. And the question in our minds was, is that what it means to be a philanthropist, to give out money? And we actually started to look a little deeper. And we started asking ourselves some other questions that I think are profoundly important for the discussions today. This really led to, I'll zip through this. This led us to try an innovative program. It's called the Giving Project. And basically what it was, I want to get to this quickly because I want you to introduce you to one of the participants, but I want to give you enough context. The Giving Project took our model of community-led grant making and actually inverted it a little bit. So what we did is we said, the power really comes from not just giving dollars, but actually from fundraising. There's a couple things that we realized. One, there's very few people of color in fundraising. There's another thing, very few people of color are actually giving money. Now, we know in reality that people of color, low-income folks, give more percentage-wise than people of wealth. We know that. That studies, that's been known for 30 years. So the question then is, why don't people identify themselves as a philanthropist? So we started this experiment. It's called the Giving Project. We have a model of 5 or 6 other foundations across the country. And basically, I'll give you the quick bare bones of it. It's a cohort model, so groups come together for 6 months. Oh my goodness, 1 minute already? Okay. So people come together for 6 months. They do a lot of work on race and class, so we have weekends on race and class, because part of this is about transformation philanthropy, transformational. How do you change the person? Then we actually teach fundraising as a skill, and we put them loose. They raise the money they get. And at the same time, we run a grant-making process where they have a chance to give out the money. Now, I want to tell you a little bit. I want to show you quickly. So these are actually the first cohort. And Kalia is one of our cohort members. She'll talk about what that experience was for her. But I wanted to talk about what happened in our first year. So this group of individuals raised $140,000. 34 people came together. So we actually developed leaders, fundraisers. 50% of them were people of color. That's one of our thresholds. 266 new donors. Now, just so you can understand the context, that actually increased our donor base by 50%. And the average gift was $300 and less than $1 a day. That's what it takes to be a philanthropist in our organization. So we also supported 10 organizations doing the community organizing. And here's the interesting point for me is these 34 people, 100% of them are still involved with our foundation. So for us, this idea about sustainability is vitally important for a community organization. It's also vitally important as a community organization, accountability and transparency, not things we talk about in philanthropy often, not things that exist in philanthropy often, but it's a core to our work. So I want to be respectful of time. Let me give you one other thing to think about, which is really in your community. What would it take actually to get the everyday people, the people that you know are working, involving their time, to actually be the ones that are gathering the resources and giving them out? It has fundamentally changed our foundation, which we'll talk more about in the Q&A, and you'll certainly hear it from Kalia. So Kalia, why don't you come on up here?